I knew something was wrong the second I stepped out of the rideshare and saw the movers. 3 of them stood on the sidewalk in navy shirts, leaning casually against stacks of cardboard boxes. My boxes. I recognized the corner dents, the black tape, the thick marker ink. My name was written across the top in my own handwriting. Lena Parker, the same slanted L I'd had since college. For a split second, my brain rejected the image, tried to rearrange it into something harmless. Maybe a neighbor was moving. Maybe someone borrowed my Sharpie. Maybe this was the wrong building. But the address was right. Meridian Heights. The sun was beating down on the back of my neck, my suitcase still standing upright beside me like I was just another traveler passing through. One of the movers glanced at his clipboard, then at me. "Are you Lena Parker?" he asked, his tone light, almost friendly. When I nodded, he said the words that made the street go quiet around me. "We were told to clear the unit. New owners take the keys today." The world tilted. New owners. My penthouse. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my sister flashed across the screen. "Welcome home. Guess you're homeless now." I stood there on the sidewalk while people walked past, while my life sat in boxes behind strangers, and for the first time in years, I didn't know where I belonged. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the building, at the glass reflecting the afternoon sky, at the balcony where I used to drink my coffee and watch the harbor wake up. I'd lived there for 5 years. Every inch of that space held my routines, my silence, my sense of control, and now I was being told, in broad daylight, that it was gone. "There has to be a mistake," I said finally, more to myself than to the mover. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, we just do what we're told." I swallowed hard and stepped away, my hands shaking as I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Did you land?" she asked, already irritated, as if my call was an interruption. "Mom," I said quietly, "why are my things on the sidewalk?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Don't be dramatic, Lena. We did what we had to do." My chest tightened. "Did what?" "We sold the apartment," she said like she was talking about a piece of furniture. "Your sister needed help." "You sold my home," I said. The words sounded strange out loud. "Oh, please," she snapped. "You're one person. You travel all the time. You don't need a penthouse." My father's voice cut in on speaker, calm and firm. This was for the good of the family. The good of the family. I had heard that phrase my entire life. It had justified everything from unwanted advice to decisions made without me. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "That's because we knew you'd overreact," my mother replied. "You always do." Before I could respond, another voice joined the call, bright and unmistakably amused. "So it's true," my sister Mara said. "You really came back to nothing." "Mara," I said, my jaw clenched. "Relax," she laughed. "You'll figure it out. You always do. And honestly, you should be thanking us. Josh and I were drowning." There it was. Josh, her fiancé. The man who never seemed to have a steady job but always had a reason. "You used my apartment to pay his debts?" I asked. "It wasn't just his," she shot back. "And don't act like you're some victim. You have money. You have options. I'm trying to build a family." I closed my eyes. "What did you use to sell it?" I asked. "I never signed anything." Another pause, longer this time. "That document you signed years ago," my father said carefully. "Perfectly legal." My stomach dropped. "What document?" "Don't start," my mother said. "You trusted us back then. Nothing's changed." Everything had changed. I could hear it in the way they avoided the question, in the way my sister stayed quiet for once. "I need to talk to you in person," I said. "There's nothing to discuss," my mother replied. "The sale's done." Mara laughed again, softer this time. "You should probably hurry if you want to grab anything else. The buyers are excited." I ended the call without another word. The movers were waiting, pretending not to listen. One of them gave me a sympathetic look. "Rough situation," he said. "Can you put everything into storage?" I asked. My voice surprised me. It was steady. "Of course." As they began loading the truck, I stepped aside and watched my life disappear box by box. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something colder settle in my chest, something that pushed the panic away and left only clarity. They hadn't panicked. They hadn't acted out of desperation. This had been planned. When the truck pulled away, I was left standing alone with my suitcase and nowhere to go. I checked into the first short stay I could find, a narrow room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. The bed was stiff. The light was harsh. It couldn't have been more different from the space I'd lost. I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the silence wrap around me. My phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." I set the phone face down and opened my laptop instead. If they thought I would panic, they were wrong. If they thought I would beg, they didn't know me as well as they believed. Somewhere beneath the shock and the humiliation, a question was forming, sharp and insistent. What exactly had they sold? I logged into my digital vault, the one I'd set up years ago after a lawyer warned me to keep copies of everything important. Trust documents, property records, old medical forms, files I hadn't looked at in years. I opened the folder labeled Meridian Trust, Final. The power of attorney was there, just as I remembered it, medical decisions only. Signed after a surgery when I was vulnerable and grateful for help. I scrolled through it slowly, line by line. Not transferable. No property authority. My breath caught. I opened the trust document next. The penthouse wasn't listed as a simple asset. It was held under specific restrictions. Sale required my direct presence. My signature, no exceptions. I leaned back against the headboard, my heart pounding. They couldn't sell it. Not legally, not the way they had. They assumed I wouldn't check. I thought of my father's voice, confident and dismissive. "Be grateful we handled it for you." I thought of Mara's laughter. Homeless. A crack formed inside me, not of pain, but of understanding. They thought they had won. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. Tomorrow I would verify the sale. Tomorrow I would start asking questions they never expected me to ask. For now, I lay back on the unfamiliar bed, my suitcase still unopened, and let one thought anchor me. They sold the apartment. They just didn't know what it really was. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my boxes on the sidewalk, my name written in thick black marker, Mara's message looping in my head, homeless now. By morning, the shock had worn off and left something sharper behind. Suspicion. I made coffee with the tiny motel machine and sat at the narrow desk, laptop open, documents spread across the screen. The trust papers from the night before were still there, solid and unambiguous. My penthouse could not be sold without me. That fact alone should have been enough to calm me, but it didn't. Because legal truth and family behavior had never lived in the same world. I opened my email and searched for anything related to the apartment. Sale notices, realtor messages, automated alerts. There was nothing. No listing confirmation. No contract draft. No request for signatures. Not even a courtesy heads up. It was as if the sale had happened in a vacuum, without me ever existing as the owner. That was the first real red flag. I pulled up the county's public real estate records and typed in the property address. Meridian Heights, Unit 32, A. The page loaded slowly, then refreshed. Status sold. I stared at the screen, my fingers cold on the keyboard. The listing date was less than 2 weeks ago. The closing date was yesterday, 48 hours from listing to sale, in a building where units usually sat for months. Worse, the sale price was far below market value. Not a small discount, a desperate one. No buyer with sense would rush a deal like that unless they were being pushed, or unless someone on the other side was desperate to unload it. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, and let the pieces start lining up. The timing, my trip, the silence, the rush. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a maneuver. I grabbed my phone and called the building management office. I'd known the concierge team for years. They knew me, or at least, I thought they did. Meridian Heights, a woman answered. This is Claire. Hi, this is Lena Parker, Unit 32A, I said. I have a question about my apartment. There was a pause. Oh, she said. Yes. We were told you were unavailable. My grip tightened. Unavailable how? Your parents handled the sale, she replied carefully. They said it was best not to disturb you. Best not to disturb you. The phrase landed like a slap. Did anyone try to contact me directly? I asked. Another pause. We were advised not to. I thanked her and ended the call, my chest tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. They hadn't just sold my home. They had erased me from the process, presented me as someone who couldn't be trusted with her own life. I sat there for a long moment staring at the wall. Then I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I called the buyer. The number was listed on the public record, along with the deed transfer. I hesitated with my thumb over the screen, then pressed dial before I could talk myself out of it. It rang 4 times before a man answered. Hello? Hi, I said, steadying my voice. My name is Lena Parker. I believe you purchased my apartment. Silence stretched on the line. Then a slow exhale. We were wondering when you'd call. That sentence sent a chill down my spine. You were? Yes, he said. I'm Daniel. My wife and we thought something felt off. I closed my eyes. I didn't authorize the sale, I said. I didn't even know it was happening. He didn't sound surprised. Your parents told us you were aware. They said you'd given consent but were emotionally overwhelmed and didn't want to be involved. Emotionally overwhelmed. The words burned. Did they say anything else? They said you were fragile, he admitted quietly. That you didn't handle stress well, that involving you would make things harder. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just theft. This was character assassination. Do you still have the emails? I asked. Yes, he said immediately. We kept everything, and the notary appointment was rushed. Your parents insisted on handling all the paperwork. I swallowed. Would you be willing to share those messages? Of course, he said. We never wanted to be part of something like this. We ended the call, and I sat there in the motel room, staring at the blank wall as the reality settled in. They hadn't just lied to me. They had lied about me, painted me as unstable, so no one would question why I wasn't present. I thought back to all the times my mother had called me sensitive, to my father telling me I worried too much, to Mara rolling her eyes whenever I pushed back. They had been laying this groundwork for years. I opened my laptop again and waited. The emails arrived 10 minutes later. I read them slowly, each one confirming what my gut already knew. My mother writing to the realtor, asking for speed. My father reassuring the buyers that I was incapable of handling legal matters. A message that made my hands shake as I read it twice. She doesn't need to be involved. She won't understand the urgency. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms into my eyes until stars bloomed behind them. They didn't just take my home. They took my voice and handed strangers a version of me that suited their needs. My phone buzzed, a text from Mara. Why are you talking to the buyers? I didn't respond. Another message followed, this one from my father. This is getting out of hand. We'll explain everything when you calm down. Calm down. The family favorite. I set the phone aside and stood up, pacing the small room. The more I looked at the evidence, the clearer the pattern became. The rushed sale, the low price, the silence, the lies about my mental state, the use of a document that was never meant for this. This wasn't about helping my sister in a moment of crisis. This was about control, about deciding my life for me because they believed they had the right. I sat back down and pulled up my bank app without thinking, more out of habit than intention. A list of transactions filled the screen. At first glance, everything looked normal: bills, transfers, familiar numbers. Then my eyes caught something else. Small withdrawals, regular, always under the amount that triggered alerts, labeled with notes like family help or temporary support. My heart skipped. I hadn't come here to look at my finances. But suddenly, I couldn't look away. I scrolled back. 1 month, 3 months, 6. The same pattern repeated. Quiet, consistent. Easy to miss if you trusted the people who had access. A cold realization crept over me. They didn't sell my penthouse because they needed money that week. They sold it because they had been bleeding money for a long time. I closed the app and leaned back, my pulse steady but heavy. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Somewhere outside, a car horn blared, life continuing as if nothing had changed. I reached for my phone and typed one message. Not to my family, to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Are you available? I think I need legal advice. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know how ugly it would get. But one thing was certain. They hadn't won. They had just made their first mistake. The morning light crept through the thin motel curtains, pale and unforgiving, and for the first time since I landed, I didn't feel disoriented when I opened my eyes. I felt alert. The emails from the buyers were still open on my laptop, their words burned into my memory. Emotionally overwhelmed, fragile, won't understand the urgency. I replayed those phrases as I sat up in bed, letting the anger sharpen instead of consume me. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't confused. I was focused. I showered quickly, pulled my hair back, and made myself sit at the desk again. If they were willing to lie about me so easily, then the truth wasn't going to reveal itself all at once. I would have to trace it, piece by piece. I started with the building. Meridian Heights had always felt like a quiet constant in my life. Familiar faces at the desk, a sense of privacy. A place where people respected boundaries. Or at least, I thought they did. I called again, this time asking to speak to the property manager directly. "This is Richard," a man answered, his voice professional but guarded. "Richard, this is Lena Parker. I own Unit 32A, I said, choosing my words carefully. I need to understand exactly what information was shared about me during the sale. There was a pause long enough to tell me he was choosing his response. "We were told you were unavailable due to personal reasons," he said finally. "Your parents handled everything." "Personal reasons," I repeated. "Did anyone say I was unwell?" Another pause, shorter this time. "They mentioned you were under a lot of stress," he said, "that it would be better not to involve you directly." Better? For whom? "Did anyone verify that with me?" I asked. "No," he admitted. "We assumed family authority." I thanked him and ended the call, my jaw tight. Family authority. It was astonishing how easily that phrase erased ownership, consent, autonomy. All the years I'd worked to build something stable for myself, and one narrative from my parents had undone it in the eyes of strangers. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, letting the anger move through me without drowning me. They hadn't just excluded me. They had defined me in a way that made exclusion seem reasonable. That realization hurt more than losing the apartment. My phone buzzed. Another message from Mara. "You're being dramatic. You're embarrassing all of us." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new tab and searched my own name. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for the quiet humiliation of realizing how little of my real self existed outside my own head. Public records were sparse, employment history clean, no scandals, no instability, nothing that matched the story my family had told, which meant they'd invented it. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a slow, simmering rage. They hadn't panicked and lied in the moment. They'd reached for a narrative they knew would work, because they'd used it on me my whole life. Sensitive, overwhelmed, too much. I thought back to my 20s. To the first job I took in another city, the way my mother had worried out loud about whether I could handle the pressure. to my father's habit of stepping in whenever a decision felt uncomfortable, to Mara laughing it off whenever I pushed back, telling me I took things too seriously. This wasn't new. The sale was just the boldest expression of it yet. I closed the browser and reopened the emails from Daniel and his wife. I read them again, slower this time, noticing details I'd missed before. The urgency, the insistence, the way my parents framed the sale as an act of rescue, not theft. We're just trying to stabilize the situation. Lena would want that. I scoffed softly. They had no idea what I wanted. They had never asked. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Daniel again. "Hi," he said gently. "I just wanted to check in. My wife and I talked, and we feel awful about this." "I appreciate you calling," I said. "I know this isn't easy." "There's something else," he continued. "During the signing, your father kept saying things like, 'She'll be fine, she always bounces back.' It struck me as odd. It struck me as familiar." "Did the notary verify anything with me?" I asked. "No," he said. "Your parents insisted it wasn't necessary. They said you trusted them completely." I closed my eyes. Trusted. Past tense. After we hung up, I sat there in silence, letting the pattern crystallize. Every step of this had relied on one assumption: that I would remain quiet, that I would accept whatever explanation they offered, that I would prioritize peace over truth as I always had. But peace built on erasure wasn't peace at all. I pulled up my calendar and scrolled back over the past year. Trips, meetings, conferences, days when I'd been out of town, unreachable by design. It didn't take long to notice how often those dates lined up with the withdrawals I'd seen the night before. A chill ran through me. They hadn't just waited for an opportunity. They had used my independence against me. I remembered my mother telling me how proud she was of my career, my father praising my discipline. At the time, it felt like validation. Now, it felt like inventory. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my father. "We need to talk. This is spiraling." I stared at the message, then locked the screen without responding. For the first time, I understood something I'd never let myself see before. This wasn't about helping Mara. It wasn't even about money. It was about preserving a system where I absorbed the cost so everyone else could avoid it. I stood up and paced the room, my thoughts moving faster now. If they were willing to lie to buyers, to building management, to notaries, then the truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried under layers of justification, and buried things don't stay buried forever. I sat back down and opened my bank statements again, this time with purpose. I exported the last 12 months into a spreadsheet and began highlighting transactions. Small amounts, consistent intervals, transfers that never came with follow-up or repayment. By the time I reached the bottom of the list, my hands were cold. This wasn't help. This was extraction. I thought of every time I'd brushed off a missing amount as a mistake. Every time I'd told myself family didn't keep score. Every time I'd chosen not to look too closely because looking felt like betrayal. The irony nearly made me laugh. My phone vibrated with another message from Mara. "You don't understand what we're dealing with. Josh is under a lot of pressure." Josh. There it was again. I stared at his name on the screen, the way it slid so easily into conversations about sacrifice and obligation. I didn't know much about him beyond what Mara chose to show. Charming, restless, always between opportunities, and always in need of something. I didn't reply. Instead, I typed his name into the search bar. What came back wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no scandals, just a trail of half-finished things, short-term jobs, address changes, a civil case from years ago settled quietly, nothing illegal on the surface, nothing reassuring either. I leaned back, my heart beating steadily now, not wildly. This wasn't about proving anyone evil. It was about seeing clearly, and clarity was settling in fast. I closed the laptop and looked around the motel room at the neutral walls and temporary furniture. This wasn't home, but for the first time since I landed, I didn't feel homeless either. I felt awake. They thought I wouldn't question the story they told. They thought I'd be too busy cleaning up their mess to notice how it was made. They thought wrong. because the more I uncovered, the more obvious it became. This wasn't one bad decision, it was a pattern, and patterns leave trails. The realization settled in slowly, like cold water rising around my ankles, then my knees, then my chest. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't panic. Someone had lied, deliberately, to make all of this happen. I sat at the motel desk with my laptop open, the morning half gone without me noticing. The spreadsheet from the night before glowed on the screen, rows of dates and numbers lined up with brutal neatness. Small withdrawals, predictable timing, and now, layered on top of that, the sale itself. Too fast, too cheap, too clean. Nothing about it made sense unless it was designed not to. I pulled up the public listing again and studied it more carefully. The agent's name, the brokerage, the marketing photos. They were generic, rushed, clearly recycled from older listings. No staging, no open house, no attempt to maximize value. In a building like Meridian Heights, that alone was suspicious. My parents hadn't been trying to get the best price. They'd been trying to get it done. I closed the listing and stared at the wall across from me, the paint chipped near the baseboard. For years I had told myself my family was chaotic but well-meaning, that they crossed boundaries because they loved too much, not because they wanted control. But love didn't look like this. Love didn't erase someone from their own life. I picked up the phone and called the building again, this time asking for security. "This is Andre," a man answered, his voice cautious. "Hi, Andre. This is Lena Parker from 32A. I need to ask you something off the record." He hesitated. "Okay. Who was accessing my unit before the sale?" There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Your parents," he said, multiple times, with contractors, with the realtor. "Was I ever listed as restricted access?" I asked. "Yes," he replied slowly. "We were told not to let you in unscheduled, that it might upset you." My throat tightened. "Upset me how?" "They said you weren't in a good place emotionally." I thanked him and ended the call before my voice could give anything away. They hadn't just lied to buyers. They hadn't just lied to management. They had instructed people to treat me like a liability, like someone who needed to be managed instead of respected. I stood up abruptly, pacing the narrow room. My hands curled into fists, then relaxed. Anger would be useful later. Right now, I needed clarity. I opened my email and searched for the realtor's name. Olivia Marsh. The messages were short, polite, professional, and every single one was addressed to my parents. I wasn't copied. I wasn't mentioned as a participant. I was spoken about, not spoken to. One email made my stomach drop. "She doesn't need to be involved. We're acting in her best interest." That line wasn't written for convenience. It was written for justification. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse slow and steady. They hadn't been scrambling. They had been constructing a narrative, one where I was absent by choice, one where my silence looked like consent. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from Mara. I let it ring. A minute later, a text appeared. "Why are you doing this? You're making everything worse." I almost laughed. Worse for whom? Instead of responding, I did something I should have done days ago. I called Olivia Marsh. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary but polite. "This is Olivia." "Hi, Olivia, my name is Lena Parker. You handled the sale of my apartment." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Oh." That single syllable told me everything. "Yes," she continued carefully, "I was told you were aware of the sale." "I wasn't," I said evenly, "and I'd like to understand why everyone was instructed not to involve me." She exhaled. "Your parents were very clear. They said contacting you would complicate things." "Did they say why?" I asked. "They said you were emotionally overwhelmed," she admitted, "that you didn't handle pressure well." I closed my eyes for a second. Hearing it out loud from a stranger stripped it of any lingering ambiguity. "Did that concern you?" I asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "It did. But they presented a power of attorney. Everything looked authorized. There it was again. That document. The one meant for hospital rooms, not real estate deals. Did they rush you? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. They wanted the sale closed as quickly as possible. They accepted the first offer. Even though it was low? Yes. Did you ask why? I pressed. They said speed mattered more than value. I thanked her and ended the call, my chest tight but my thoughts crystal clear. Speed mattered because delay meant risk. Risk meant questions. Questions meant me. They hadn't sold my penthouse because they needed money immediately. They sold it because they couldn't afford for me to find out what they'd been doing. I sank back into the chair, staring at the ceiling fan as it rattled softly overhead. Every memory I had of my family rearranged itself under this new light. The urgency, the secrecy, the dismissiveness. It wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. My phone vibrated again, this time a voicemail notification from my father. I didn't listen to it. I already knew what it would say. That I was overreacting, that I was making trouble, that this could all go away if I just calmed down. That was the trap. Calm down, let it pass, let them handle it. I wasn't falling into it again. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Evidence. I dragged in emails, screenshots, public records, notes from my calls. Every piece of this puzzle went into one place. As I worked, another realization crept in, quieter but more disturbing than the rest. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had wanted my compliance. By painting me as unstable, they justified every step they took. To themselves, to others, maybe even to the law. If I was too emotional to be involved, then my absence wasn't theft, it was protection. That lie hurt more than anything else. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my objections to keep the peace, all the times I'd let them speak for me because it seemed easier. I had trained them, without meaning to believe I would always stay silent. That training had ended the moment I stepped off that rideshare. I checked my bank app again, scrolling through the withdrawals with a new lens. The dates aligned eerily well with moments I'd been distracted. Conferences, flights, long work days. Times when I trusted that nothing would go wrong because family was handling it. My stomach twisted. This hadn't started with the penthouse. The penthouse was the final move, the clean exit. I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. I looked tired, older than I'd felt a week ago. But I didn't look broken. I looked alert. My phone buzzed again, another text from Mara. If you keep digging, you're going to regret it. That one did make me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. People who were innocent didn't threaten. People who had nothing to hide didn't panic when questions were asked. I typed a response, then deleted it. I didn't need to say anything. Not yet. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Samantha Blake, attorney, the woman who had insisted I create the trust in the first place. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Calling her meant crossing a line I'd avoided my entire adult life. It meant choosing truth over family harmony, consequences over comfort. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring. Lena? Yes, I said. My voice was steady. I need your help. My family sold my penthouse while I was out of state. There was a pause on the line, then a sharp inhale. Do not talk to them anymore, she said immediately. Not one word. I closed my eyes, a strange sense of relief washing through me. Send me everything you have, she continued. And Lena, this isn't just a family dispute, this is fraud. I hung up and sat there, the motel room suddenly too quiet. They had built this on lies, on silence, on the assumption that I would back down. They were wrong. And the moment they realized it, everything was going to change. I didn't go looking for proof that morning. I went looking for reassurance. I opened my banking app the way I always did, half awake, expecting the familiar comfort of numbers that made sense. Rent paid, utilities scheduled, savings untouched. For years, that screen had been my quiet proof that at least one part of my life was stable. Instead, I felt my stomach tighten. At first, nothing looked wrong. The balance was where I expected it to be. No giant red flags, no dramatic withdrawals. That was how they'd designed it. Small numbers never trigger panic. Small numbers are easy to forgive. I scrolled back 1 month, then 2, then 3. That's when I saw the pattern. Tiny withdrawals, spaced just far enough apart to look harmless. 200 here, 250 there, always under the threshold where my bank sent alerts. Always labeled with something familiar: family help, temporary support, emergency. Emergency was my favorite lie. Emergency implied urgency. It implied necessity. It implied gratitude. My fingers hovered over the screen as I scrolled further back. 6 months. 9. A year. The same rhythm repeated itself with unsettling precision. I felt a cold wave wash through me. Not panic, not shock, but recognition. This wasn't sloppiness. This was strategy. I exported the last 18 months of transactions into a spreadsheet and opened it on my laptop. One by one, I highlighted every transfer tied to those labels. When I was done, the screen glowed with yellow marks like a warning sign I'd been ignoring for far too long. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. They hadn't taken everything at once because they didn't need to. They'd taken it slowly, quietly, counting on my trust to do the rest. I thought back to the first time my mother had asked for help, just this once. Mara was behind on something. Josh had hit a rough patch. It would only be temporary. They'd pay me back, they never did, and I never asked. Because families don't keep score. That was the rule I'd been taught. That was the rule I'd lived by. And that was the rule they had weaponized. I leaned forward again and began sorting the data by recipient. That's when I saw his name. Josh Henderson. Not on every transfer. Not even most of them. But enough. Enough to be deliberate. Enough to be undeniable. Sometimes the money went directly to him. Sometimes it went through a second account before landing somewhere else. Credit cards, online lenders, payment processors I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. This wasn't just my sister's debt. This was a shared ecosystem. A web of obligations and avoidance that my parents had been quietly feeding with my money. I clicked on one payment processor and opened the details. Gambling platform. Legal but aggressive. High fees. The kind of place people didn't go once by accident. I closed the tab slowly. They hadn't been rescuing Mara from a bad month. They'd been propping up a lifestyle that was collapsing under its own weight. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk before this goes too far." Too far. The irony was almost funny. I didn't respond. Instead, I scrolled further back. The earliest withdrawal appeared just over a year ago. Around the same time I'd taken on a new project at work. Longer hours, more travel, less attention to my personal accounts. Perfect timing. I felt something settle deep in my chest then. Not anger, not grief. Something colder, something clearer. This wasn't help. This was extraction. They hadn't asked. They hadn't warned me. They hadn't even told me after the fact. They'd simply decided that what was mine was available. That my stability was expendable as long as theirs remained intact. I thought of the penthouse again. Of how easily they'd sold it. How little concern they'd shown for the price. It wasn't desperation, it was efficiency. The sale wasn't the beginning, it was the end. The final move in a long process designed to solve a problem they'd been hiding from me for over a year. I stood up and paced the motel room, my footsteps muffled by cheap carpet. Every memory replayed itself differently now. Every conversation took on a new meaning. The urgency in my mother's voice, the defensiveness in my father's. Mara's entitlement disguised as vulnerability. I stopped pacing and sat back down, my hands steady. I opened the app settings and scrolled until I found it. Authorized access. A secondary user. My mother's name. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered exactly when I'd added her, after my surgery years ago. I'd been groggy, grateful, trusting. She'd offered to help with bills while I recovered, just in case. We never removed it. Why would we? She was my mother. The realization burned. They hadn't hacked anything. They hadn't broken in. They'd walked through an open door I'd left unlocked because I believed love was reason enough. I removed her access without ceremony. No confirmation message. No alert sent to her phone. Just a quiet click, and it was done. For the first time in months, the bleeding stopped. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mara. "Why are you checking accounts?" "That's invasive." I laughed out loud, a short, humorless sound that echoed in the small room. Invasive. Coming from the person who'd helped herself to my home. I typed a response, then erased it. She didn't deserve an explanation. None of them did. Instead, I opened a new document and began listing dates. Withdrawals, locations, notes, patterns. By the time I finished, my hands were cold, but my mind was sharp. This wasn't an emotional betrayal. It was a financial one. Documentable, traceable, illegal in more ways than one. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, then answered. "Lena," a woman's voice said. Calm, controlled, familiar. "It's Samantha Blake." I exhaled slowly. "I was just organizing everything." "Good," she replied. "Because what you're describing isn't just inappropriate, it's systematic financial abuse." Hearing it labeled made my throat tighten. "I suspected as much," I said. She paused. "How far back does it go?" "Over a year," I answered. "Small amounts, consistent." "That's intentional," she said. "It avoids scrutiny, and it establishes a pattern." A pattern, that word again. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "You don't confront them, you don't warn them, you let me handle this." I closed my eyes. "They'll panic." "They already are," she replied. "And panic makes people sloppy." After we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the weight of it all settle. My family hadn't just crossed a line. They'd erased it. They'd built an entire system around the assumption that I would never look too closely. They were wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from my father. "You're hurting your sister." I stared at the words until they blurred. No, I thought. I stopped protecting her from consequences. I set the phone face down and leaned back, staring at the dim ceiling. They didn't cross a line. They erased it. And now, whether they liked it or not, I was going to redraw every boundary they had ever pretended didn't exist. Josh Henderson's name wouldn't leave my screen. I didn't notice it at first, not consciously. It sat there between transactions like a background hum you only hear once the room goes quiet. A transfer routed through an unfamiliar account. A payment reference that didn't quite match the others. JH, urgent. JH, short term. JH, bridge. Bridge to what, exactly? I sat at the motel desk with my laptop open, coffee long gone cold beside me, scrolling back through the spreadsheet I'd built the night before. I filtered by recipient, by memo, by routing number. And there it was again. Josh's name, tucked neatly into the machinery of my family's finances. He wasn't just benefiting. He was embedded. My chest tightened, not with rage, but with something colder. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion, and suspicion demanded answers. Josh had always existed on the edge of my life, Mara's fiancé, the charming presence at holidays, the man who talked big and delivered very little. He was always between jobs, always on the verge of something better, always one opportunity away from stability. That was how Mara framed it. That was how my parents repeated it. I had accepted that story because it was easier than questioning it. I opened a new browser window and typed his full name into the search bar. The results weren't dramatic. No criminal records, no viral scandals, just fragments, short-term employment histories, a string of addresses that never lasted more than a year, a civil lawsuit from several years back, settled quietly and sealed, debt-related, credit obligations, nothing illegal, nothing reassuring. I clicked deeper. The lawsuit named a co-signer, my mother. My breath stalled. I stared at the screen, rereading the line until it burned into my mind. It wasn't speculation. It was documented. Years ago, before Josh was even engaged to Mara, my parents had already stepped in to clean up his mess. This wasn't a recent crisis. This was a pattern. I closed the browser and leaned back, pressing my fingers into my temples. The image of Josh shifted in my mind, losing its soft edges. He wasn't just unlucky. He wasn't just struggling. He was familiar with being rescued, comfortable with it. And my family had made me his safety net without ever telling me. I thought back to every conversation where Mara had mentioned money. The urgency, the tears, the promises that things would be different after the wedding. I remembered how quickly my parents jumped in to defend Josh whenever I asked questions. He's under a lot of pressure. He means well. He's trying. Trying had become a shield, one that deflected accountability and redirected cost. My phone buzzed with a message from Mara. "Josh says you're overreacting. This isn't what you think." I stared at the screen for a long moment. This wasn't about what I thought anymore. This was about what the numbers said. I scrolled further through the spreadsheet and highlighted every transaction connected to accounts Josh had access to. When I totaled them, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just thousands. It was tens of thousands, spread out in a way that avoided detection but accumulated relentlessly. They hadn't been saving him. They'd been sustaining him. I stood up and paced the room, the cheap carpet muffling my steps. The motel walls felt closer than they had before, like the truth was taking up space where denial used to live. Josh wasn't a side character in this story. He was a beneficiary, and beneficiaries don't stay passive when their lifeline is threatened. As if summoned by the thought, my phone rang. Josh's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me this call mattered. Not because he deserved my attention, but because I needed to hear him without the filter of Mara or my parents. I answered. "Hey, Lena," he said, his voice smooth, measured. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I replied evenly. There was a pause, brief but telling. "Look, things have gotten blown out of proportion. We're all stressed. Let's just slow down and figure this out like adults." Like adults? The phrase almost made me laugh. "Figure what out?" I asked. "The part where my apartment was sold without my consent, or the part where my money's been quietly rerouted to cover your debts?" Silence. Then a sigh. I didn't want it to come out like this. That was all the confirmation I needed. "How long?" I asked. "Lena." "How long?" I repeated. Another pause. Longer this time. "It started before the engagement," he admitted. "But your parents offered to help. They said you'd understand." My jaw clenched. Understand what? "That family takes care of its own," he said. "That you've always been strong, that you'd land on your feet." There it was. The logic laid bare. My strength, my stability, my independence weren't admired. They were exploited. "You never asked me," I said. "No," he replied quietly. "We didn't think you'd say yes." I closed my eyes. The honesty finally offered felt like acid. "And the wedding," I continued. "That was supposed to fix this, wasn't it?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "It was supposed to buy us time." Time. Not change, not accountability. Just more time to keep the system running. I ended the call without another word. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. Whatever shock I might have felt had already passed. In its place was clarity. Josh hadn't manipulated my family into this. They had invited him into it, protected him, enabled him. They built this together. I opened my laptop again and began adding another layer to the evidence file. Josh's financial history, the lawsuit, the transaction pathways, the dates that lined up with his job gaps and spending spikes. The picture sharpened with every click. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my mother. "Please don't talk to Josh without us. You're misunderstanding his situation." I didn't respond. Another message followed from my father. "He's part of the family now. We protect family. Protect." That word had lost all meaning. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of it all settle. My family hadn't been manipulated into making bad choices. They had chosen convenience over honesty, control over consent, and silence over respect. And Josh had thrived in that environment. I thought of Mara, of the way she'd always positioned herself as the one in need, the one who couldn't possibly handle consequences. I wondered how much of that was learned and how much was cultivated, how often my parents had stepped in before she ever felt the ground shift beneath her feet. My phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail notification from Josh. I didn't listen. I didn't need to hear him justify himself any further. I already knew the truth. This wasn't my sister's crisis. This was his lifestyle. And my family had decided it was my responsibility to fund it. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the thin curtain aside. The parking lot below was quiet, the sky washed in late afternoon light. Life was continuing, indifferent to the collapse happening inside me. I felt strangely calm. This was the moment where pity would have pulled me backward, where guilt would have made me soften, where fear of breaking the family apart would have convinced me to compromise. Instead, I felt resolve settle in. I wasn't going to negotiate, I wasn't going to reason. I wasn't going to plead for understanding from people who had never offered me the same courtesy. I picked up my phone and sent one message. Not to Josh, not to Mara, to Samantha. Josh is involved, deeply. I have documentation. Her response came quickly. Good. That confirms intent. Stop all direct contact. From here on, everything goes through me. I exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough to let me breathe. I looked back at the spreadsheet one last time, at the web of transactions and choices and lies. It was ugly. It was overwhelming. But it was also complete. They hadn't betrayed me alone. They had done it as a unit. And now that I could see the full shape of it, I knew exactly what had to happen next. I stared at the ceiling long after the sun went down, the motel room quiet except for the hum of traffic outside, and for the first time since this began, everything finally made sense. Not in a comforting way, in a precise, almost clinical way. My laptop sat open on the bed, documents spread across the screen like pieces of a map I could no longer unsee. The trust papers, the sale records, the bank statements. Josh's name threaded through it all like a vein carrying poison. When I looked at it as a whole, there was no chaos anymore, no confusion, just design. This hadn't been a moment of desperation. It had been a system, and systems don't collapse unless someone applies pressure. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I had been avoiding for days. Samantha Blake, attorney. The woman who had insisted years ago that I protect myself even from the people I loved most. At the time, I'd smiled politely and assumed I'd never need her again. I hesitated with my thumb over the screen, not because I doubted what I needed to do, but because I knew what calling her meant. Once I crossed that line, there would be no pretending this was just a family disagreement, no retreat into silence. No going back to the version of myself who absorbed everything to keep the peace. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring. Lena? Yes, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. I need your help. There was a brief pause, then the tone in her voice shifted. Tell me what happened. They sold my penthouse while I was out of state, I said, without my consent, and I think they've been draining my accounts for over a year. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She didn't soften her response. Do not talk to them anymore, she said immediately. Not your parents, not your sister, not her fiancé, no one. I closed my eyes, relief washing through me. Okay. Send me everything you have, she continued. Tonight, every document, every email, every transaction. And Lena, I need you to understand something. What? I asked. This isn't a misunderstanding, she said. This is fraud. The word landed with weight, but not shock. I had already reached it on my own. Hearing it confirmed felt like a door clicking shut behind me. After we hung up, I stayed where I was for a long moment, phone still warm in my hand. The room felt smaller, but my chest felt lighter. The burden of figuring this out alone had been heavier than I realized. I spent the next few hours uploading files, labeling folders, creating timelines. I didn't rush, I didn't skim, I worked carefully, deliberately, like someone assembling a case instead of a plea. By the time I finished, my inbox chimed with a reply from Samantha. "Got everything. This is serious. We'll talk in the morning." I set the laptop aside and finally lay back, exhaustion creeping in around the edges of my resolve. Sleep came in fragments, but when I woke, it wasn't with panic, it was with purpose. My phone was already buzzing when morning light filtered through the curtains. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails stacking up like a countdown, my mother first. "Why won't you answer your phone?" Then my father, "You're making a huge mistake." Then Mara, "Josh is freaking out, call me now." I stared at the screen, my pulse steady. This was new, not the messages themselves, but the urgency beneath them. The shift in tone, the crack in their certainty. They knew something had changed. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made coffee, showered, and sat back down at the desk to wait for Samantha's call. It came just after 9. "I've reviewed the documents," she said without preamble, "and I want you to listen very carefully." I am. "The power of attorney they used does not grant them authority to sell real property," she said. "If your signature was applied without your knowledge, that's forgery. The misrepresentation to buyers and the building adds another layer, and the financial withdrawals—" She paused. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's long-term financial exploitation," she finished. "Intentional, structured, and provable." I let out a slow breath. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we stop them from doing any more damage." She outlined the steps calmly: an emergency filing, a request to freeze the proceeds of the sale, formal notices, subpoenas if necessary. She didn't sugarcoat anything. This would get ugly, it would get public, and my family would not take it quietly. "They will accuse you of betrayal," she warned. "They will say you're tearing the family apart. They will guilt you, threaten you, and try to scare you into backing down." I thought of Mara's message. "Josh is freaking out." "I can handle that," I said. "Good," she replied, "because the most important thing you can do right now is stay silent. Let me speak for you." After we hung up, I sat back and let the quiet fill the room. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. The messages kept coming. My mother's tone shifted first, from irritation to concern. "Please call me. I'm worried about you." Then my father tried a different angle. "This doesn't have to go further. We can fix this privately." Finally, Mara, "You're making everything worse. You're going to ruin us." I read each one without responding, noticing the way their language changed as the hours passed. The confidence drained away. The authority dissolved into fear. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were asking why I wasn't cooperating. That told me everything. By afternoon, Samantha sent another message. "We're filing the first motion tomorrow morning. After that, all communication goes through me." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, a strange calm settling over me. Filing meant commitment. It meant the law stepping in where I never had been allowed to. It meant boundaries, enforced by something stronger than guilt. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Josh. I ignored the call. A minute later, a text followed. "Let's talk like adults. We can work something out." I almost smiled. Work something out meant keep the system running, keep the money flowing, keep the consequences at bay. I didn't reply. The final message of the day came from my father. "If you push this, you'll lose your inheritance." I stared at the words until they stopped feeling sharp. There it was. The last card. The one they had always held over me without ever saying it out loud. My value, reduced to what I might one day receive if I stayed in line. I set the phone down gently and let the silence stretch. Inheritance wasn't leverage if it came at the cost of my autonomy. Money wasn't security if it required my erasure. And family wasn't family if love only existed when I was useful. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I didn't feel afraid of what was coming. I felt anchored. They had taught me to stay quiet, to absorb, to endure. The law had taught me something different. I didn't have to explain myself anymore. I didn't have to negotiate my worth. I didn't have to sacrifice truth for harmony. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, knowing that by morning the process would begin. Not a confrontation, not a plea, a reckoning. And this time, I wouldn't be the one breaking under it. The first full day after Samantha filed the paperwork was the day my family realized I wasn't begging anymore. I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop on the motel nightstand, the screen lighting up again and again until it felt like a strobe. Missed calls stacked on top of each other. Messages piling up so fast I couldn't read them all at once. My mother, my father, Mara, Josh. Over and over, like if they just tried hard enough I would break. I didn't. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater kick on and off, and noticed something strange. My chest wasn't tight, my stomach wasn't in knots. The familiar guilt, the one that usually rushed in the second my parents sounded upset, was nowhere to be found. I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages slowly. My mother's came first. "Please call us. Something's wrong." That alone told me everything. Something wasn't wrong for them until they lost control. A second message followed, more frantic. "We need to talk before this gets out of hand." Out of hand. As if I were the one who'd sold a home that didn't belong to me. As if I were the one who'd spent over a year siphoning money from someone who trusted me. I set the phone down without replying and went to make coffee. By the time I sat at the desk with my mug warming my hands, the tone of the messages had already shifted. My father tried next. "This is not how families handle problems." Then another. "You're embarrassing us." I almost laughed. Embarrassment mattered now. Not theft, not fraud, not betrayal. Just how it looked. I opened my laptop and pulled up the case folder Samantha had shared with me. The motion had been filed. The clock was ticking. There was nothing for me to do now except stay quiet and let the process move. That silence was doing more damage than any argument ever could. The phone buzzed again, this time with a FaceTime request from Mara. I watched her name flash across the screen, her photo frozen mid-smile, and felt a wave of something close to pity. She had always relied on immediacy, on emotion, on getting to me before I could think. I declined the call. Seconds later, a voice message came through. I listened, against my better judgment. Her voice was sharp, breathless. "What are you doing? Do you have any idea how bad this is? You're ruining my future, Lena. Josh says this could turn criminal. Do you want that on your conscience?" Criminal. There it was. Not denial, not outrage. Fear. I deleted the message and didn't respond. Another notification popped up, this one from Josh. "Let's talk. This doesn't have to go further." I stared at the words for a long moment. When he said further, what he meant was public. Consequences, a record, exposure. He followed it with another message almost immediately. "We can fix this quietly. I'll pay you back, after the wedding. Just give us time." Time. That word again. Always time. Time to hide. Time to delay. Time to keep things just barely together. I locked the phone and pushed it aside. An hour later, Samantha called. "They're calling you non-stop, aren't they?" she said, not bothering to ask. "Yes," I replied. "Good," she said calmly. "That means the filing reached them." I exhaled. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the court's response," she said. "And we document everything. Messages, voicemails, threats, promises. It all helps." Threats. I glanced at the phone on the desk. "They're not threatening yet." "They will," she said. "They always do when they realize guilt isn't working." After the call, I sat there listening to the sounds of the motel, doors opening and closing, a child laughing somewhere down the hall. Life continuing in small, ordinary ways while mine was being dismantled and rebuilt at the same time. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother, and the message was longer. "Eva, sweetheart, please stop this. You're misunderstanding everything. We only did what we did because we love you and your sister. You're tearing the family apart and people are starting to ask questions. Think about what this will do to all of us." I read it twice. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she acknowledge what they had done. It was all about the family, the image, the damage to them. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, a quiet realization settling over me. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing access. By early afternoon, the messages had escalated. My father called 3 times in 10 minutes. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. I listened to it once. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You're being manipulated by lawyers who don't care about you. Call us now before you make a mistake you can't undo." Manipulated, as if I hadn't spent weeks digging through evidence myself, as if I were still the daughter who could be redirected with a stern tone and a warning. I deleted the voicemail. Then came the message that finally stripped away any remaining illusion. "If you keep pushing this, you'll lose your inheritance." I stared at the screen, my heart steady, my hands calm. So that was it. The last lever. The one they'd never pulled outright before but had always implied. Stay in line, and you'll be taken care of. Step out, and you'll be cut off. I felt something inside me settle, solid and unmovable. Inheritance meant nothing if it came with conditions that erased me. Money wasn't security if it required silence in the face of abuse. I forwarded the message to Samantha without comment. Her reply came a few minutes later. "Thank you, that's very useful." The rest of the day passed in waves of noise and quiet. Calls that went unanswered. Messages that grew shorter, more frantic. Mara tried again in the evening, this time with a softer tone. "Please, just talk to me. We can figure something out." Figure something out meant undoing consequences, rewriting reality, asking me to absorb the cost one more time so she wouldn't have to. I didn't reply. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the phone finally went quiet. Not completely, but enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, listening to my own breathing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't bracing myself for the next emotional blow. I felt detached, grounded, clear. My phone buzzed one last time that night, a text from Samantha. "They're scared, and for good reason." The court responded faster than expected. "We're close." I smiled, just slightly, the expression unfamiliar on my face. They had always believed my silence meant weakness, that my willingness to smooth things over meant I would never hold my ground. They were wrong. As I turned off the light and lay back, the darkness didn't feel threatening. It felt protective, like a pause before something irreversible. They had taken my home. They had drained my accounts. They had called me dramatic, unstable, homeless. And now, stripped of my cooperation, they were unraveling. They didn't realize it yet, but the worst part wasn't what the court would do to them. It was the fact that I was no longer afraid of their anger. And once that fear was gone, they had nothing left to use against me. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of sterile calm that pretends nothing terrible ever happens inside its walls. I sat on the hard wooden bench outside the courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, watching people walk past as if this were just another Tuesday. Attorneys with briefcases, couples whispering to each other. A man in a wrinkled suit pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. Life. Moving forward, unconcerned with the fact that my family was about to be legally exposed. Samantha sat beside me, calm and unreadable, a thick folder balanced on her knee. She hadn't said much since we arrived. She didn't need to. Her presence alone grounded me in a way nothing else had since this began. "They'll be here," she said quietly, glancing at her watch. "They always show up late. It's a power move." I nodded. I wasn't nervous, not in the way I thought I would be. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't shaking. What I felt was heavier than fear and steadier than anger. Readiness. A sharp click of heels echoed down the hallway, followed by voices I knew too well. I didn't look up at first. I didn't have to. My mother's voice carried before she came into view, tight, controlled, already vibrating with outrage. "There she is," she said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "sitting there like she's done nothing wrong." I lifted my gaze slowly. They stood a few feet away. My parents dressed in their version of seriousness. Neutral colors, polite expressions strained thin. Mara hovered just behind them, arms crossed, jaw tight. Josh stood beside her, stiff and pale, his confidence nowhere to be found. For a moment none of us spoke. Then my mother stepped forward. "Ava," she said sharply, "you need to end this now." Samantha stood immediately, positioning herself between us. "Any communication goes through me." My mother scoffed. "Oh, please, this is a family matter." "No," Samantha replied evenly. "This is a legal one." My father's face darkened. "You've turned your back on us," he said, his voice low and cutting. "After everything we've done for you." I felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to explain myself, to soften the blow. But it passed almost as quickly as it came. "You sold my home," I said calmly, "and you stole my money." Mara let out a sharp laugh, humorless and brittle. "You make it sound so dramatic." Samantha's eyes flicked to her. "Your sister's characterization doesn't change the facts." Josh finally spoke, his voice strained. "We didn't think it would get this far." I looked at him directly for the first time since the phone call. "That's because you didn't think I'd fight back." His mouth opened, then closed again. The courtroom doors opened before anyone could respond, and the bailiff called out our case number. The sound echoed down the hallway, drawing curious glances from strangers who had no idea they were about to witness the unmasking of a family. Inside, the courtroom felt colder. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense posture, took her seat and scanned the documents in front of her. "This hearing concerns an emergency injunction regarding the sale of a residential property and alleged financial misconduct," she said. "Counsel, you may proceed." Samantha stood. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and precise, "my client's parents and sister sold her penthouse without her consent while she was out of state. They used a restricted power of attorney intended solely for medical emergencies. The signature applied to the sale documents was forged. Additionally, funds from the sale and from my client's personal accounts were diverted to cover third-party debts." The judge raised an eyebrow and looked toward my family. "Is that so?" Their attorney, a man I'd never seen before with nervous eyes and a tie that felt too loud for the room, stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. The parents believed they had authority. Belief is not law," the judge cut in. "Do you contest the claim of forgery?" The attorney hesitated. "We are still reviewing the documents." Samantha didn't miss a beat. She stepped forward and handed the clerk a folder. "We've provided bank statements, transaction histories, and preliminary expert analysis indicating the signature was traced, not signed." The judge flipped through the pages, her expression tightening. My mother gasped softly. "This is unbelievable," she whispered, loud enough to be heard. "She's destroying us." I didn't react. The judge looked up. "I'm inclined to grant the injunction pending further investigation," she said. "All proceeds from the sale and any related accounts will be frozen effective immediately." Josh stiffened beside Mara. My father stood abruptly. "You can't do that." The judge's gaze snapped to him. "Sit down, sir." He did. The gavel struck once, clean and final. "The injunction is granted. Further hearings will be scheduled." Just like that, the ground shifted. As people began to file out, My mother turned to me, her face flushed with fury. "How could you do this?" she hissed. "We're your parents." I met her eyes, my voice quiet but firm. "You stopped acting like parents when you decided my life was yours to trade."